idea. Biden's border crisis, desecrating national park lands, and damaging communities. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statement at the hearing is limited to the chairman and the ranking member. I therefore ask unanimous consent that all other members' statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted in accordance with Committee Rule 3.0. Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the following members be allowed to sit and participate today in today's hearing. The gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Tiffany. The gentlewoman from Virginia, Ms. Kiggins. The gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Maliatakis. The gentlewoman from New York, gentleman from Mr. Esposito. Without objection, so ordered. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Good morning, everyone. I first would like to take a moment to say thank you to our witnesses for your travel. Thank you for coming before the committee today to discuss the Destroying America's Best Idea, Biden's border crisis, desecrating national park lands, and damaging communities. Last September, Chairman Westerman and I visited New York City in the wake of Mayor Adams, a Democrat, predicting that the massive increase in migrants was destroying the city. After being denied a tour of the processing center, we visited Floyd Bennett Field with local elected officials, as well as representatives from the National Park Service. An agreement to the lease site, which sits on National Park Service land, had just been signed between the City of New York and the National Park Service. Local residents, local elected officials, and even law enforcement repeatedly vocalized their concerns for the wrongly reached plan to house thousands of migrants on one of the largest green spaces in New York City. We asked all kinds of questions about safety and security for both the employees and the migrants themselves. All of our concerns were ignored at this time the focus was simply on housing more people at any cost, no matter what rules needed to be bent. Here we are, 9 months later. All the problems we predicted have come to pass. Let's quickly tick through them. Crime in the local area has gone up. Stress on local and park law enforcement has increased. Local citizens have experienced reduced access to green spaces. Even the migrant population at the camp itself is not safe. During a winter storm last year, the migrants had to be evacuated to a local high school, which caused the students to miss school. Above all, building this camp did nothing to resolve the overall issue of reducing the number of illegal immigrants coming to New York City seeking shelter. The Biden administration misguided immigration policies are at the heart of these issues. Since the beginning of this administration, President Biden has rolled back many of the policies that helped reduce the number of illegal aliens coming to our border, through our border, and entering our cities. Just yesterday, suspected terrorists with ISIS ties were arrested by ICE in New York City and several other cities. The men were migrants who crossed the southern border just last year. The Border Patrol has lost nearly a quarter of its workforce since October of 2020. Twice as many agents have chosen to retire early compared to the Obama and Trump administrations. One agent even commented that, quote, "The administration is so bad for morale, I am not trying to be political, I'm just speaking the facts. It's become political. Catch and release is demoralizing the agents," end of quote. In fact, the situation has gotten so bad during President Biden's time in office that President Biden himself is now desperately attempting to reverse this course and limit asylum claims with an executive order. But this action comes a little, too late, and further supports the committee's conviction that housing migrants on national park land is neither an appropriate use of the nation's most treasured places, nor does it address the Biden administration's border crisis. The committee is thoroughly investigating Biden's administration's decision to lease Floyd Bennett Field and has issued requests for document productions, held briefings, conducted interviews involving several federal entities involving the Department of Interior, National Park Service, Department of Homeland Security, and the Executive Office of the President. The committee will continue to move forward with this investigation until the Biden administration not only commits to a rapid demobilization plan for the camp at Floyd Bennett Field, but also acknowledge their mistakes in creating this precedent. America's national parks are called our nation's best idea. The National Park Service mission is to, quote, "preserve unimpaired and the natural and cultural resources and values of the national park system for the enjoyment, education, and inspiration of this and future generations," end of quote. Housing migrants at National Park Service land sets a dangerous precedent that, left unchecked, could expand into either public lands and national parks, transforming the legacy of a park system from one of natural beauty to a pay-for-play system, prioritizing migrants over our shared national and cultural history. The Floyd Bennett Field lease expires in September. The Biden administration has so far remained silent about the future plans for the migrant camp at Floyd Bennett Field. However, I want to make sure we're clear about this. The lease must end, and it will in January. I'm now recognizing the ranking member for her opening statement.
All right, well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to welcome our witnesses who've traveled to be here today. This is the 6th hearing that the House Natural Resources Committee has had on the topic of immigration, and it's the 4th meeting that we've had in this subcommittee. Now, I want to remind my colleagues that this is the Natural Resources Committee, not the Homeland Security Committee, and this is also the 2nd hearing in a row in which the Republican leadership of this committee has invited a witness who is an active candidate running for Congress. So I want to just remind my colleagues that our taxpayer dollars are not to be used for political purposes or as a campaign stop for political activities. And in addition to that, I think it's worth noting that this committee was originally scheduled for earlier in the morning, but was rescheduled so that Donald Trump could meet with House Republicans off campus for a political rally this morning. So here we are, in spite of all of that, having an immigration hearing this morning in the House Natural Resources Committee under the pretense of concern about a federal lease on public lands. But I guess my question is if folks are so concerned about federal leases, why did they not raise their voices when Donald Trump violated the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution and a federal lease with the GSA so that he could use the National Post Office building here on Pennsylvania Avenue to open a Trump hotel and use it as a personal piggy bank during his presidency, as foreign governments spent millions of dollars at that hotel while they were meeting with him in the Oval Office with official business. Furthermore, he used one of our greatest national parks for a 4th of July campaign rally, even against the objections of the local tribes for whom it is a sacred place. Or what about Attorney Barr using his authority to call park police and National Guard troops in to take public citizens out of Lafayette Park, which is also a public space in front of the White House, after he did not want them there protesting after the death of George Floyd. Or when the Trump administration blasted through public lands and habitats to advance their various priorities around the development of natural resources. And my question is, why didn't the leadership of this committee raise their voices then? And also, if we're so concerned about NEPA, which I'm excited to hear that we're suddenly concerned about NEPA, why is it that they demanded, as part of the flesh of the negotiation over the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which they are now violating during their budget hearings, that we undermine the fundamentals of NEPA in order to keep the U.S. economy from shutting down? So I find it extremely ironic that we're here today in what appears to be more like a New York State or New York City Assembly meeting to talk about a park in New York and the use of a small piece of an airstrip in this park for housing individuals who have come to this country to seek asylum. So what is this hearing actually about? Is it actually about public lands? Is it about NEPA? Or is it about using this committee for campaign activities to advance a political agenda during a campaign year and to advance political candidates? In fact, we tried to pass bipartisan immigration reform here in Congress just a few months ago, and the very gentleman that these folks have been meeting with this morning told them to not support bipartisan immigration reform because it was a good issue for Donald Trump to campaign on. So I just find it very rich that we're sitting here this morning to talk about violations of federal leases, of which there's been extremely lengthy due diligence to make sure that that did not occur, talking about immigration and demonizing immigrants who come to one of the greatest cities in the world, who has welcomed immigrants with open arms for literally centuries, in a committee that does not have jurisdiction to work on these issues. So I look forward to the conversation. I do welcome our public officials for joining us today. This is the people's house. This is your house, but this is not a campaign stop. And with that, I yield back.
I find it rich. I find our natural resources, our greatest natural resources, are the people I'm looking at, the people of this country. That's where we have something to do. I would like to now introduce our witnesses. First, we have Ms. Jamie Williams, Assembly Member, 59th District, New York State Assembly. Mr. Paul King, President, Bell Harbor Property Owners Association. Ms. Amy Fisher, Director of Refugee and Migrant Rights, Amnesty International USA. Ms. Elizabeth Morrissey, President, Madison Marine Park Homecrest Civic Association. Gotta say that 3 times, a tongue twister. Let me remind the witnesses that you're under committee rules. You must limit your oral statements to 5 minutes, but your whole statement, entire statement, will appear in the hearing record. To begin your testimony, please press the on button so we can all hear you. It'll stay green for the first 4 minutes, and it'll turn yellow. When you see it red, kind of wrap it up so we can keep that. I now will recognize Ms. Williams for her 5 minutes. Thank you for coming back. Here you go.
Okay. Good morning, Chairman Gosar, Ranking Member Melanie Stansberry, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me here today. My name is Jamie Williams, and I represent the 59th Assembly District in New York State. Last September, without any input from the surrounding communities, National Park Service entered into an agreement with the New York City to house migrants in tents at Floyd Bennett Field. No thought was put into how it would affect tax-paying New Yorkers who live and work in Marine Park, Mill Basin, Garrettson Beach, Mill Island, the Rockaways, and other parts of the surrounding area. No care was given to how this would affect our already depleted police precinct, or how transportation would be affected, how the conditions of our park would be affected, what would this do to our local businesses, with such an influx of 2,000 people meant for residents in the surrounding areas. No one was making those decisions, cared about the answers to those questions. Over the last 9 months, we have seen the answers to those questions come to life. We see increased response time to crimes, overcrowded buses, where fights break out amongst the migrants. We see people illegally selling food in our streets with babies strapped to their backs, young school-age children who, instead of being in class, are sitting on a median or walking in and out of traffic selling chocolate bars. We see migrants begging at our doors and trying our door handles at all hours of the day and night. We have seen migrants attempting to jump in front of cars, illegal, unlicensed, and unregistered scooters zooming in and out of traffic lanes carelessly. We see residents unable to shop at our local stores without being harassed by the migrants who are aggressively panhandling in our parking lots, in our store parking lots. We see our schools inundated by more students who rarely show up to class on time, disrupting the day for the children who are ready to learn and who are on time. We have seen the conditions at our park deteriorate with garbage thrown everywhere, trash going into the waters after beach parties, children swimming in our waterways without any type of supervision where there's clearly no swimming signs, illegal unregistered cars parked all over our grassland area. We've had fights breaking out where the security guards are running for their lives, a slashing and a strangulation within the confines of the base camp. And let me make it clear, these are the events that we know about. Reports from the police officers and park police have stated that the staff at the compound are hiding what is happening in the base camp, oftentimes not calling it a criminal activity, and are unwilling to allow law enforcement into the tents. The powers that knew that this was a recipe for disaster. They knew that putting 2,000 people who claim they were desperate and seeking asylum in a different place of desperation was not going to go well. So what did they do? They said that it was exaggerated by us, and when we asked the questions, they said that they will circle back. The only thing that I can say to those who made those decisions is that we told you so. We told you that this was no place to house these individuals. We told you that this base camp would negatively affect communities and residents. We told you that it would affect our transportation and our quality of life. The National Park Service mission is to preserve unimpaired natural and cultural resources and values of the national park system for the enjoyment, education, and inspiration of this and future generations. With garbage thrown about, old cars leaking into our grasslands, and dangerous e-bikes and scooters carelessly being placed and used on our parked land evades that mission. As we near the end of the lease, we are here again once more, and we ask that this lease be renewed. We need to restore our national park and bring back the quality of life that the residents of the communities I serve deserve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Williams. I now recognize Mr. King for his 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman. Oh, just like a Zoom meeting, do it all the time. Good meeting, Chairman Gosar, Ranking Member Stansberry, members of the committee. My name is Paul King. I'm a longtime civic leader on the Rockaway Peninsula, which is just across Jamaica Bay from Floyd Bennett Field. I'm currently president of the Bell Harbor Property Owners Association. I'm also a member of Queens Community Board 14. I'm 60 years old, and I've lived every one of those years within 4 miles of Floyd Bennett Field. I use Floyd Bennett Field and Gateway National Recreation Area for youth sports, kayaking, biking, and camping. Uninformed critics mock Floyd Bennett Field as just an old airport. And it's true, the federal government terribly neglects Floyd Bennett Field and Fort Tilden and Charles Park. But the field and Jamaica Bay are wonderful natural resources in our crowded boroughs of Brooklyn and Queens, where our citizens don't have a lot of space to enjoy nature. Now, from the moment Governor Kathy Hochul said she wanted a migrant camp in Floyd Bennett Field, people from across the political spectrum said it was a bad idea, a flat-out mistake. Local civic associations, sports organizations, park advocates, the Legal Aid Society. Indeed, my congressman, Gregory Meeks, a Democrat, said putting a tent city in Floyd Bennett Field was a terrible idea, perhaps even inhumane. The congressman knows that Floyd Bennett Field is exposed and cold in the winter. It's a floodplain that's susceptible to storm surges during hurricanes. It makes no sense. But the congressman also said the migrant camp would not happen because housing on a national park is against the law. He said only an emergency declaration by President Biden would make it legal. And Congressman Meeks was right. The camp is illegal. It directly violates the act of Congress that created Gateway. It's also a terrible place for people to live. We've had one big rainstorm, not a hurricane, not a big nor'easter, and the camp had to be evacuated. I mean, it seems that Floyd Bennett Field's only benefit is it's a place where Mayor Adams can hide the migrants far away from Manhattan. Now, unfortunately, as Assemblywoman Williams was saying, all of the residual effects, the direct harm to our neighboring communities in Brooklyn and Rockaway, the things that we warned about are coming true. You know, our neighborhoods are where New Yorkers live their American dream. Our parents and grandparents worked hard and sacrificed to create safe spaces for their children. We're doing the same for our children, but now crime and lawlessness are increasing in our communities. You know, migrants on these illegal scooters not only weave in and out of traffic, they run through stop signs, red lights, they even fly down sidewalks at high speed. They don't respect our laws or our safety. Aggressive panhandling, you know, it's happening at schools and homes. Just last week, a migrant from Floyd Bennett Field was caught on video climbing onto a second-floor terrace in Neponset and trying to break into someone's house. Our retail stores are suffering from shoplifting and lost customers. We have migrants with small children, you know, not only standing in boulevard medians, they're out on the highway hawking fruit and drinks. And the park itself is being damaged. The park is being damaged and dumped on. Our own working-class Americans are losing opportunities to earn money. The list goes on, but almost all of this was predictable. And ladies and gentlemen, the worst is yet to come. Summertime, utilization of the park spikes. Number of people who come to the beaches in Rockaway spikes just as well. Thousands of extra people, including some of the folks who are proving to be bad guests, will flow into neighborhoods that have limited services and very little police presence. Similar to what the Assemblywoman said, it's a recipe for disaster. In September, hurricane season kicks in full force. The National Hurricane Season Center said this is going to be a bad year with as many as 4 to 7 major storms. Having literally been in the Atlantic Ocean during Sandy, I can tell you, you don't want to be in a tent a few feet above sea level when the big one hits. Now, as you know, New York City and the National Park Service, almost certainly will extend the lease this September. This is a mistake. It must not be allowed. It's bad for the migrants, it's bad for citizens, it's bad for our national park, and it's bad for our national park system, since the MPS director's memo claiming this camp is consistent with the purpose of the park opens the door for every national park to be used as a migrant camp. So I asked the committee to do everything in its power to provide relief to the citizens in Brooklyn and Queens, to make sure that this temporary camp doesn't become permanent, and to end the illegal lease in Floyd Bennett Field. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. King. I now recognize Ms. Fisher for her 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Gosar and Ranking Member Stansbury, for the opportunity to testify this morning. Amnesty International is a Nobel Prize-winning global human rights organization committed to fighting for a world in which every person enjoys all of the human rights enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. As the Director of Refugee and Migrant Rights at Amnesty International USA, I work to ensure the U.S. is upholding these human rights obligations, particularly Article 14, stating that everyone has the right to seek and enjoy asylum from persecution, and Article 25, establishing that everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and his family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care, and necessary social services. And while I am here today in my professional capacity, in my personal life, I am a proud volunteer with Migrant Solidarity Mutual Aid, an organization here in Washington, D.C., made up of hundreds of volunteers, community organizations, and faith institutions that has welcomed thousands of newcomers to our community. I have spent my free time welcoming new arrivals off of buses, helping to fill out immigration applications, sorting and distributing donations, and delivering furniture and household goods to my new neighbors. And earlier this year, my family and I provided shelter in our home for an asylum-seeking family who was left on the winter streets by DC's Office of Migrant Services that had a 3-night shelter limit at the time. This 1-year-old girl and her sweet parents stayed in our home and became an extension of our family until they were able to move to an apartment of their own. It is through this personal experience that I know the joy of welcoming people with dignity. And it is in my capacity as the Director of Refugee and Migrant Rights at Amnesty that I know that the U.S. has an obligation to do so under international law. The situation in New York City was a perfect storm of high numbers of newcomers, exacerbated by Governor Abbott's busing program, and people arriving without existing resources in the U.S. As New York City was struggling to respond to high numbers of new arrivals, there was a lack of focus on case management, housing, and job programs. Limited access to work permits and processing delays further exacerbated the issue by restricting a people's ability to work and save money to move out of shelters and into permanent housing. This led to the shelter population outpacing capacity in New York City, and the city finding far more inaccessible places to shelter its new residents, like Floyd Bennett Field. Alternatively, a coordinated reception system that meets the immediate and medium-term needs of people seeking safety would cut the chaos and dysfunction both at the border and the interior, while local communities reap the windfall benefits of new federal funding avenues, spending power of new arrivals, and new tax revenue. A recent study by the Department of Health and Human Services found that resettled refugees and asylees contributed billions more in federal, state, and local government revenues than they received in services. Across the country, programs that provide case management, legal assistance, and social services have been proven to be cost-effective, help people leave shelters into permanent housing, and ensure compliance with immigration requirements. Specifically, Congress should robustly fund the Shelter and Services Program that provides financial support to local governments and community organizations to offer immediate reception services to new arrivals, expand the successful case management pilot program, and create a destination reception fund to send federal dollars to state, local, and tribal communities to build medium-term reception programs that promote self-sufficiency and bolster local capacity to ensure new and old community members have what they need to thrive. I'll close with the story of Carla, who fled Venezuela with her husband and 2 children to seek safety and security. When they arrived in Washington, D.C. in October 2022, they were provided shelter in a hotel room. Carla and her husband first found under-the-table work until they could pay an attorney and file for asylum. Finally, after saving up more money, they were able to move out of the shelter and into their new apartment in October of 2023. Carla benefited from welcoming services, but says she could have moved out of the shelter sooner with access to legal assistance, rental assistance, and case management. A licensed cosmetologist in Venezuela, Carla has opened a cosmetology business in her new home and hopes to expand to hire workers and give back to her new community. This April, Carla filed taxes for the first time and is putting her newly minted work permit to good use, and she's grateful to this country for all that it has given her. People seeking safety don't damage our communities. They make them more vibrant and help our economies grow. I encourage Congress to invest in solutions that uphold the dignity and human rights of all of our communities, both those who have called the U.S. home for generations and those arriving to our borders with dreams. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fletcher. And now, Ms. Morrissey, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Gosar and Ranking Member. Thank you for inviting me to testify today. My name is Elizabeth Morrissey, a civic leader for Marine Park Madison Homecrest Civic Association, a community in South Brooklyn where Floyd Bennett Field is located. I'm also a retired New York City Police Department lieutenant and have lived in the area for 52 years. As you're aware, the state and the city sought assistance from the federal government through the Department of the Interior to house thousands of migrants at Floyd Bennett Field. As a local civic leaders and residents, we were told the city had no other options. Floyd Bennett Field is a national park with significant historic value to our community. If you have not visited, you would also understand that the park has provided a lot of resources, including things like aviation club and an outdoor spaces for our residents and visitors. That being said, it does not have proper infrastructure for housing people. When we first heard the rumors of this lease being signed between the National Park Service and the City of New York as involved citizens, we tried to find an official way to make our voices heard. However, we repeatedly denied our community when we tried to explain the challenges of Floyd Bennett Field, including the fact that it lacks infrastructure and it's located on a floodplain. We were ignored. Instead, the city chose to prioritize the rights of sheltering migrants at this site in particular. My question is, where do the rights of migrants end and our rights begin as taxpayers? If you were a Floyd Bennett Field today, you would realize quickly that you're not allowed access to the migrant camp unless you're a migrant. As a taxpayer and local civic leader, I have no right to enter the shelter. Even local NYPD officers have difficulty entering the site when called, without first being approved by hired private security. However, migrants can enter our community with little to no documentation and stay in the camp, which houses families, particularly all without documentation you and I would need to get basic driver's licenses. It is not humane to house thousands and thousands of migrants in a flood zone. Remember Sandy, we were underwater. One storm over the past few months was so bad the city had to evacuate the migrants and move them to local high school gym, James Madison, for shelter, which resulted in the school being closed the next day to our kids. Is that right? Is it right and humane for our community to observe migrant children, sometimes accompanied and sometimes not, with parents, begging and selling candy and fruit on the Flatbush Avenue median between our 4 lanes of traffic on each side? The children are sometimes doing it during school hours. Floyd Bennett is the very end of Brooklyn, so kids have to be bused all over the school to attend. No one's enforcing that right. The community also has to avoid migrants from jumping in front of cars while driving. Migrants are trying to get hit or say they were hit to demand money, or they will call the police. The scheme has been reported on several news publications as recently as last week. Is that right? Basic errands to local businesses have become torturous between begging and shopping parking lots and aggressive panhandling of migrants to carry packages for money. Home Depot and Lowe's parking lots are full of migrants, causing fear to our elderly and angering others. Our community members are trying to run simple errands on their days off from work for their families. Is that right? There are videos of large fights breaking out in Floyd Bennett. There are domestic calls, putting a greater strain on our first responders. Our city agencies are already low on manpower. The state cannot house thousands and thousands of migrants in close quarters, basically like caged animals, and think violence will not happen. Is that right? Again, the worst part of the children are being used by migrant parents to follow delivery trucks and steal packages from the trucks and community stoops and areaways, ringing doorbells, asking for money. Is that right? Our local stores have migrants coming in and grabbing products, causing some to lock their doors. Our local stores are struggling already. The summer is coming. Is it humane to leave migrants on tar mats in blazing sun for those who haven't visited Floyd Bennett prior to becoming a national park, once New York City's first airport? It serves as an incredible piece of history, but at the core, it's an aviation base. If our middle class community see how wrong and humane this is, I can understand how the rest of the world, particularly officials from the city and state of New York are blind to this. I will end with this. Things do not happen. Things are made to happen. John F. Kennedy. Our state is making things happen that are not humane for anybody. If there are loss of life this year from violence or heat, the state and the city of New York made it happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Connell, for those comments. We're now going to go to members' questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Mr. King, I want to say your question you pose is very good. Whose park is it next? Because I'm concerned about the national lakeshore that we have in Wisconsin, or is it going to be other national parks across our country that are going to be next? But I want to ask a question of Representative Williams. I see one of your statements here says without any input from the surrounding communities. Is that correct, that the federal government didn't come in and coordinate with local communities and ask them, is it okay to do this? How can we work out the logistics of making this happen?
There was absolutely no input, no communication whatsoever regarding Floyd Bennett Field to the residents of the Assembly District.
Thank you. Ms. Fisher, do you think that the federal government should coordinate with local communities in situations like this rather than leaving them shut out, as Representative Williams just said?
I wholeheartedly agree. I think when we are able to ensure that community members, local governments, and people can come together to work through solutions, then that is obviously ideal.
So,
I think what
so
we
you
see
believe they
too
should
often-
coordinate, right, Ms. Fisher?
Yes,
That
sir.
they should coordinate. And you said people, referencing people fleeing violence and persecution in your testimony. Should we be allowing people to come into this country? We've had over 10 million that are simply economic migrants. Been to the border numerous times. I've been to Panama, down to the Darien Gap. Should people be allowed in as economic migrants?
I think the data actually shows a little bit of a different story. Over 3/4 of the people that file for asylum eventually are able to stay in the United States due to the fact that they are able to win their asylum cases or find other forms of relief. So this idea, this notion that the people that are arriving here
So, Ms. Fisher,
are coming
the
for
people that
purely
are telling
economic
me-
reasons is not based in fact.
The migrants that I actually talked to down on the border that said, no, we just came here because the border was announced that it was open January 20th of 2021. Do you believe they should be allowed in this country under our asylum laws?
I have been to the border numbers of times.
Yes or no, should they be allowed in if they're simply economic migrants?
Everyone has a human right to seek asylum. It
So I'm
is
gonna
up
take
to the
that
immigration
as
courts
a-
to
I'll
determine
take that
whether or
as a
not
yes.
someone has
Is there
a valid
anyone,
claim.
Ms. Fisher, that should not be allowed into our country that wants to come into the United States from a foreign country?
The United States has the ability to enforce its borders. That does not, Amnesty International does not tell any country whether or not they should or should not be
So
able
there
to
are
enforce
some
their
people that should
borders.
be denied entry into our country? Is that what you're saying?
That is the position of the United States to figure that themselves. That cannot come at the expense of the United States' obligations to uphold the human right to seek asylum.
You talked about our obligation under international law. Do you believe international law trumps American law?
No, sir, I do not, and that is why the United States has long established that seeking asylum is a human right under domestic law. In 1980, Congress passed the Refugee Act.
But the law also says you have to prove that you're a refugee, correct?
No, sir. The law proves that people have the opportunity to seek asylum regardless of their manner of entry, and they have a process by which they are determined whether or not they have a way to stay.
Which is the process of proving whether...
Precisely.
Yes, so it does say that under the law. Is it humane to have Americans' earnings reduced due to illegal immigrants coming to take their jobs? In the last jobs report, half of the jobs that are created here in America in this last jobs report are going to people who are here illegally. Is it humane to have Americans have their pay reduced as a result of the competition that's coming?
There's actually no evidence that shows that immigration has an impact on wages. The United
Actually, there
States-
is, Ms. Fisher. If you go back to the previous administration, the people on the lowest economic strata, their wages were actually going up significantly. I want to get just a couple other questions in. Should taxpayers have to pay for food for the people you're referencing?
What we
Should
know.
taxpayers have to pay for shelter or rent for those people that are coming in?
Those types of programs are significantly less costly than the programs that we have in the moment.
Should
that
they
are
have
very
to pay for
clearly-
attorneys for these people?
The right to counsel in court is a bedrock of our criminal justice system,
So
and
they
I
should.
believe it should be
they have to
extended
pay
to
for a
those
gym
facing
membership?
life.
If a person you're referencing, should they have to pay for a gym membership if someone requests it?
I don't think so, and I'm not aware of any such program.
We may go, the gentleman's time is out of time, we may go second round.
Chairman, thank you very much for
Sorry
the
about
time. I yield back.
Gentlewoman from New Mexico is recognized.
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. One quick note, we're getting some messages that folks are having trouble hearing, so if you can speak up in the microphones, that would be helpful. First of all, I want to say I am very sensitive to the local concerns, and so please don't take the antagonism that you're seeing and hearing on the dais as in any way dismissive of the local community's concerns about what you're experiencing. It's just about process. It's about how the resources of this committee are used, the kinds of issues that are within the jurisdiction of this committee, and what this committee is actually tasked with. So I do want to talk a little bit, since we are here to talk about immigration, and that's what the committee leadership has chosen to do, to ask some follow-up questions of Ms. Fisher, because I think it's really important for people to understand what is driving immigration on a global scale. You know, we're seeing immigrants all across the world seeking asylum, not only in the United States, but also across other countries in Europe and Asia. We have immigrants coming from Venezuela, Cuba, Haiti, Turkey, many West African countries right now. Talk to us about what some of the driving factors are for these families that are trying to find asylum.
Thank you so much for the question. As you noted, as of the end of September 2023, there were over 114 million people forcibly displaced worldwide. I think it's important to note that over 76% of those people are actually hosted in low and middle income countries, not the United States. The people that are coming to the United States are mostly coming from countries like Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, Colombia, Honduras, Haiti, as you mentioned. In Venezuela, there is a lack of access to economic and social rights, and the majority of the population there is experiencing extreme food insecurity. Notably, critics of President Maduro's government are arbitrarily detained, forcibly disappeared, and tortured with the acquiescence of the judicial system, and Amnesty has documented that people that have been deported to Venezuela have faced arbitrary arrest. People come from all over. When I was most recently at the border, I had the opportunity of speaking to a group of Afghans who were seeking asylum. They were members of an ethnic minority group, women and students who were fleeing the Taliban rule. So people really come with all different reasons to seek safety and exercise that human right.
Thank you. And I think that those examples are really important for people to understand. So I represent New Mexico, and a lot of the rhetoric that we hear around here around immigration is every state's a border state. Well, New Mexico is an actual border state, and we have the opportunity through our institutions and the various programs and services that are working with asylees to hear their stories. And folks are coming from all over the world, and the journeys that they go on to arrive here are not unlike probably everyone in this room's unless you're Indigenous or you're Black, your journey to get here to the United States was probably not unlike the journeys that the people who are coming here today. They're traveling thousands of miles. They're putting their lives on the line. They're experiencing the most possible risks of violence, things that could happen to their families. And when I think about it and really imagine my own ancestors, many of whom came to the United States in the 1850s at the height of the Irish potato famine, it's amazing to me when you sit in hearings like this, because literally the rhetoric that you're hearing here on the dais could be a hearing from 1850, because this is the same argument that people have been making about immigration, immigrants, the diminishing of people and their struggles and whether or not they deserve to be here, the diminishing of their ethnicity, their culture, their language, the diminishing of whether or not it is appropriate for women and children who are facing rape and political violence in their country to come to the United States. I mean, really, that is what this is. It's just a repeat, and it happens to be an incredibly potent issue politically right now during an election year. So it's, disturbing to hear, and especially in a committee like this, to be used in this way. But, the other question I want to ask, and like I said, I don't want to diminish the very serious issues that have been raised by our local officials and community residents, and I know we're going to do a second round, so I'll save my questions about this, is how we can help create a more orderly situation through bipartisan immigration reform, and to make sure that we can address these local concerns for communities that are receiving large numbers of immigrants. And with that, I'll yield back and hold for the second round.
I think the gentlelady from New Mexico, the gentleman from the great state of Arkansas, the chair of the main committee, Ms. Westerman, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Gosar, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. And I would like to talk a bit more about how this process of leasing national park land for a migrant camp circumvented the rules for political purposes. This is something that we've seen time and time again from the Biden administration. If you read the lease signed between the National Park Service and the City of New York, it correctly identifies Floyd Bennett Field as historic property. Now, here's where things get interesting. Instead of the typical Section 106 process, which often involves an extensive review process, it appears it has been waived. Rather, the lease refers to memo signed by Director Sams that notes that City will make upgrades and improvements to the historic area once the lease expires. Now, this is an interesting turn of events. Essentially, there's no guarantee that either construction nor the existence of the migrant camp will not endanger the historic area, something that would generally be required. Instead, the Park Service is accepting a promise of future payments for improvements to the area. Basically, they're accepting a payoff for the lease. Now, I would like to know more if this is the norm for the Biden administration these days, but those decision makers don't always want to answer questions in a public setting. I'm adding both a copy of the lease agreement and memo for the record. Now, to get to my question, in a typical process, a lease for historic property on federal land would involve some level of public engagement. So, Mr. Williams, to your knowledge, or Ms. Williams, excuse me, to your knowledge, did the National Park Service or any other federal agency consult and coordinate with any historic preservation office or council before releasing historic Floyd Bennett Field to be used as a migrant camp?
To answer your question, which was similar to an earlier question, there was no communication with us or the residents of South Brooklyn and Queens, or any type of historic entity whatsoever.
Or did the National Park Service or any other federal agency transparently provide the public information about how establishing a migrant encampment would impact Floyd Bennett Field's historic property?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Did the National Park Service or any other federal agency transparently provide the public information about how establishing a migrant encampment would impact Floyd Bennett Field's historic property?
Absolutely none.
And did the Park Service or any other federal agency seek public comment or even input from local elected officials prior to signing the lease with the city?
Negative. There was no such communication at any time.
So they basically just ramrodded this through and avoided any kind of, or sidestepped any kind of normal process. And I can tell you, I know the answer to that because they did. And that's why we continually bring this subject up, is because if they will do this at Floyd Bennett Field, where else will they do it? And, you know, an administration that talks about protecting public assets, protecting the environment, you know, never wavering on any kind of environmental permitting, it seems ironic that they would just magically wave the magic baton, which essentially has to come from President Biden at that level, to, and what it looks like they did was declared an emergency so they could waive all permitting and public input and review processes to push this agenda and to provide this migrant camp on federal land. I can tell you, when this Congress started, that this was the furthest thing from my mind that this committee would have to deal with, that this administration would go onto Park Service land, waive every rule, and build a migrant camp. Can you describe how shocking that was to you, being a resident? I mean, was this something you ever expected to happen?
Definitely no. And to the bigger picture, that I do represent 137,000 plus people in my district, and I did have to answer to them. So with not having that communication was very disrespectful to our residents, to our community. And, you know, we know what's happening. It's a national crisis, and we understand that. But when there is lack of communication, what we're seeing right now, when we were here before 9 months ago, we're seeing that our community, South Brooklyn and Queens, have become benefactors of a national crisis.
And have you had any communication on whether, with the federal agencies, on whether they will renew the lease in September?
Well, that's why we're here, to plead before you, and we will continue to do so, asking them to please not renew that lease, because if we want to think of humane, these people, let's think of a more dignified, humane way where these people can have a life and not be able to live in such an area. And we can compare this to Orchard Beach, that was in the Bronx, right? The tents were put up, it was susceptible to flooding, you know, lack of access to transportation. This is no different from Floyd Bennett Field, and they did remove those tents. So, you know, we need to treat people with some type of dignity. Thank you.
And the point being, Representative, is that you're asking, but they're not making any outreach to you to give you assurances or to answer questions or tell you what their plans are.
There's no transparency.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I thank the gentleman from Montana is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I heard this microphone's a little bit light, so I'll try and keep it up. Eat it. Okay, thanks. Yeah, just to start off, I'm always amused by the references to the immigration that took place in our country from the late 1800s to the early 1900s, which never, when our colleagues are talking about, never mentions the requirement that these immigrants had to have sponsorship from citizens here in our country, and the fact that they were not provided with this incredibly large social safety net of federal support that costs the taxpayers across this country somewhere in the neighborhood of $150 to $500 billion a year, which we can't even keep track of because so much of this money is being laundered through non-governmental organizations. Chairman Gosar, I appreciate you having this hearing today, and the impact of President Biden's border policies extends far beyond the border regions, now affecting our cherished national parks. Just last week, we discussed the harms inflicted upon Montana's tribal lands, but it is not just the tribes that are being affected. It's the entire West and the natural beauty that our parks and our countries hold most sacred. President Biden, Secretary Mayorkas, and their entire administration have no interest in border security. We have long since established that. We've seen what this administration and their allies in New York have done by allowing illegal aliens to reside on Floyd Bennett Field, turning a once beautiful park into a third world slum. These destructive policies are not only affecting Americans' park access and enjoyment, but also local communities and farmers are being harmed by uncontrolled immigration, as evidenced by Bozeman, Montana, 29% increase in felony cases over the past year, and that is attributed directly to the illegal immigration that's taking place on the southern border. Additionally, fentanyl seizures by Montana Highway Patrol have increased from 188,823 doses in 2022 to a staggering 398,522 doses in 2023, resulting in the loss of 80 Montanans to fentanyl in 2023. So this crisis is touching the entire country. We must secure the border and protect the lives of our citizens. If we had a tally of death and destruction to the tune of 75 to 90,000 people a year that was being caused by gunmen coming across the border, we would attack that country. But meanwhile, we allow it to sit wide open because it's the southern border and fentanyl coming across. Furthermore, the northern border must not be forgotten. U.S. Customs and Border Protection reported that fiscal year 2023 saw 189,000 northern land border encounters, which is a 73% increase from 2022. And a 597% increase from 2021. We've established again that the cartels, once they find out where the pressure is being applied, they adapt, they change, and they start utilizing different tactics, and that's what we're seeing take place right now on the northern border. This issue is especially critical as Montana's Glacier National Park lies on the border between the U.S. and Canada. President Biden and his administration must provide real solutions for our border and help preserve the safety and beauty of our nation and its parks. You folks are dealing with this directly. Ms. Williams, when you talk to fellow Assembly members, do they share the same concerns that you do, or are you just an isolated outlier?
Well, you're absolutely right. Very few share this, same concern that I have and a few other elected city council members. And that's why we are here today, to bring light to what our communities are facing before you.
Okay, so we're going to start talking to the communities then. Mr. King, as a longtime community leader in New York, has there ever been a time in your life where you've seen New York local government be so indifferent towards the interests of their tax-paying citizens and the communities in which they're supposed to protect?
It's pretty rare. I think there are times when they're desperate to move problems out of Manhattan and into the outer boroughs. We all experience that, but this was egregious.
So on the grassroots level, what have you seen regarding the outcry related to the usage of Floyd Bennett Field and the extreme cost the city is undertaking to house these illegals?
Well, taxpayers in general don't like the amount of money that's being spent, essentially $1,200 a cot per month, and everything that goes with that. But I think people are more concerned about the elements that Ms. Williams was talking about, the impact on the community, the degradation of the park, and the lessening ability of our families to use the park.
And I can tell you, as a member of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, I wish that this administration was as concerned about caring for our veterans as they are for caring and spending the money and the investment on the illegal aliens that we are seeing now. Mr. Chair, I see now over in the corner of my eye the clock that I have exceeded my time, so I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hunt, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Williams, are you a Democrat?
Yes, I am.
It's safe to say that you and I probably don't agree on a whole host of policy issues, but I think that we could clearly see that the Biden administration, Governor Hochul and Mayor Adams' actions have resulted in the destruction of our national borders in your national park, ma'am. Texas, where I am born and raised and from and represent, begged the federal government to end its destructive policies 2 years before illegal aliens arrived in New York in the large numbers that you are seeing today. Those pleas fell on deaf ears. The issue rose to such a level that Texas took it upon itself to fulfill the federal government's role in defending our nation's border and the citizens of this great nation. Again, this is our job, not Governor Abbott's job. What was our reward? We were sued by Biden's DOJ. So even when we tried to defend our borders and enforce laws already on the books, we were stymied. You have testified today that local residents are concerned that these issues are being ignored daily. And local residents repeatedly sought answers for simple questions concerning the potential rise in crime near Floyd Bennett Field. And those concerns, as you have articulated, fell on deaf ears. Our national parks are the treasures of this country and show the awe-inspiring landscape that God has granted the greatest country in the world. They should never be used as shelters to house thousands of Biden's illegal immigrants. Ms. Morrissey, thank you again for being here, and thank you for your service to the city of New York. As a career law enforcement official, what are some of the problems New York leadership should have expected when they moved 2,000 people into Floyd Bennett Field?
Just repeat the
Yes.
last
What
part.
were some of the problems, because as leadership in New York, what were some of the problems that New York leadership should have expected prior to? What do you think, or what action should have been taken prior to moving the 2,000 people to Floyd Bennett Field?
Okay. Thank you for asking that question. First, I just want to add that I'm not here to politicize political affiliations, because I won't be here if I did think like that. I'm here to represent my community and this problem that we have. So if we go back to before the migrants came to Floyd Bennett Field, if there was a sit-down conversation with all the elected officials from the governor to the mayor and to the specific site, which covers South Brooklyn, my district, and also South Queens, probably we could have come up with a better solution. Instead, it was just one or two individuals that made that decision, leaving out other local electeds at the table without any answers for their community. And that's the problem, because we told them from day one, it's a flood zone area. There's no infrastructure. It's lack of transportation. And the open elements, it's just not good for those. And we're talking about families. We're not talking about single men. We're talking about families that are housed in the middle of Floyd Bennett Field. Next week, we're going into extreme heat weather. So just think of having a 10, 15-minute walk from there to wait for the bus to then go to a supermarket that's five miles away, right? We know that the lease is coming up for renewal, and these are the same things that we're bringing back to the table because it hasn't changed. It has not changed. And I understand they're here for the American dream, but at the same time, we need to do the background checks, vet these individuals or these families, so that they can move to the next step. Thank you.
Of course, and again, I applaud that. This is not a political issue. I mean, we're on Capitol Hill, so this is politics, man. But this is an American issue. This is something that we could all come together and to agree upon, that those are the minimum things that we should have done in advance to move into the field. And one more follow-up question for you, ma'am. Prior to your public service, you earned a master's degree in social work and practice in that field for more than 8 years. And thank you for your continued service. Falling back on your experience as a social worker and your professional opinion, what ramifications will the policies of the Biden administration, Governor Hochul, and Mayor Adams, what will it have on the next generation of New Yorkers, given your history in your field?
Well, I think there may be some trauma that's going to be included here with what is happening, with the children being able to live in such conditions, with everything that's going on. I feel as though we have to do better. And where does it stop? Where does it stop?
So thank you very much, Mal. I'm out of time, but again, this is not a political issue. This is an American issue. And I applaud you standing up, even though it might be against stream for what your colleagues might think. Thank you very much, man, for being here.
You're welcome.
I think the gentleman from Texas, the gentlewoman for Virginia is next. You're up for 5 minutes, Ms. Kagans.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize for being late. I was in a meeting with the Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security from Virginia, who was in my office just talking about the rise in fentanyl, the rise in terrorist activities, especially at our bases, which Virginia is home to so many of just our national security interests in the form of the military. So listening to his concerns, and he made that trip to Congress to plead with me, what can be done about Virginia. We are not a border state, but we are such a border state right now, as every state in the country is. And I don't sit on this subcommittee normally, but received permission to be here because it's an issue that I care so much about, and was in the whole Natural Resources Committee meeting when we talked about this, and we talked about the living conditions for the immigrants that are homed in these national parks. And I think my colleagues have done a great job just of describing why this is not acceptable and not conditions that we can continue. But I wanted to start with Ms. Williams. Can you first tell me how many families are living, or maybe just how many people are living at Floyd Bennett Field right now?
Approximately 2,000.
Sorry?
Approximately 2,000.
Okay, and what do those families, especially the children, it's summertime now, what do they do during the day?
Well, the summer is now approaching, but what I have seen at firsthand during school hours in front of our CVS, local supermarkets, we would have a few families sit there with their children with signs. And which is even more horrific, stand in the middle of traffic on the medians, sometimes with babies strapped to their backs and toddlers or other school-age children. They're going into traffic trying to sell chocolate bars or mangoes and such, which is just quite dangerous, and we really don't need something severe to happen, because I just don't know who will take responsibility for that.
So you've seen an increase just in begging and peddlers on the streets then, for sure, and sounds like unsafe conditions
And door
for
knocking
them.
at all times, all hours of the night as well.
So, and thank you just for being here and for telling those of us who sit in Congress about exactly what's going on. It really sounds like the Biden administration is just not listening to you all, not doing right to your community, but you and your constituents you're living in the aftermath of this decision to build the migrant camp at Floyd Bennett Field. Since the camp opened, has the city of New York been willing to work with you at all about next steps, meaning the plans to close the camp and after the lease expires in September? Are they not including you in the discussion?
I would wish that they would include me. As a matter of fact, I am not treated as such because I have decided to move forward on this platform. The communication is not transparent, and it's always kind of blocked. I'm not allowed to go into Floyd Bennett Field without advance notice. So it's, it's a little bit challenging.
Is there any form of communication that you can tell your concerns, to the city? Do you just, can you write letters, or what is your form of communication with them?
Of course, we have written letters, we have sent emails, we have done FOIL requests, a plethora of different things. And again, just very little communication is given back.
Who do you write the letters to?
To
To,
our governor, Kathy Hochul, our Mayor Eric Adams, also OEM and other electeds as well, just to loop them into as to where we're going.
so you
yeah.
can safely say that you feel like your needs are not being heard, your letters are not being
Absolutely, our
addressed.
needs are not being heard or met.
Thank you.
Hence why we're here.
And Mr. King and Ms. Morrissey, and both of you, I'd like to hear how you would characterize New York City's response to the ongoing migrant crisis, and I'll start with you, Mr. King.
Well, as a civic leader, I find that, we're very detached from what's going on. We have an excellent city council representative, but that's not where the decisions are being made. They're being pushed either from Albany in the governor's office or from Gracie Mansion. And they're generally unresponsive to the needs of the community, or, try to downplay the impacts on the community because they just don't know what to do. Again, I believe that part of the reason they're in Floyd Bennett Field is that they don't want these problems on the street in Manhattan where they can be seen. So hide them, tuck them into our parks near our neighborhoods. And, we're feeling the impacts, but there's no responsiveness from New York City itself and the government.
Is that why they chose that location of Floyd Bennett Field, because it's out of the way, or?
Well, as someone who lives in the outer boroughs, I think that's always our suspicion.
Yeah.
That if there's a problem in Manhattan, people they don't want to be in the streets of Manhattan, they'll find a way to put them in the edges of Brooklyn and Queens, and without services to support them usually.
And I understand that you've experienced negotiating a lease with the National Park Service on behalf of Rockaway Little League to allow children to play baseball at Gateway National Recreation Area, of which Floyd Bennett Field is a part. Is this correct?
That is correct.
And can you describe your experience trying to secure opportunities for the children of Rockaway Little League to play at Gateway?
I'd love to. Yes, I mean, we might be the only Little League that actually is on federal land. We built the fields, and after so many years, they said, oh, you need a lease to be there. And that was quite contentious at the beginning. But we made the case that youth sports, a national recreation area, youth sports is part of your mission. And if we're bringing children into the park, that we could be educating them, bringing them in. And we were told, well, that's not part of our vision or our plan for the park. But we got our lease, and we're still there. Always wanted, they would like to move us out. But more recently, one of the local soccer leagues, which also brings hundreds of kids into the park, wanted to make investments and upgrades, but they wanted a lease. And again, they were told, no, youth sports is not part of our vision or our plan for the park. And obviously, folks in our area are shocked that youth sports doesn't belong in a recreation area, but a migrant camp does.
Wow, there are no words. But to your knowledge, has the National Park Service they've denied leases to sports leagues that want to use their recreational area land and make improvements? You mentioned the soccer league. Is that?
That is correct. The
That's a
youth
denial.
soccer league was denied.
Gentlelady's out of time.
Oh, okay. My time has expired.
I appreciate
Sorry.
it. Well,
Thank you very much.
You got really into it, so thank you very, very much. The gentlelady from New York is recognized for 5 minutes. Okay. I know. Miss Melanie talked us, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Hold on, don't let my
I know.
clock start yet.
I haven't started yet.
How do you want to do it?
You ready?
I'm ready.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, I want to thank you all for being here today. I very much appreciate you coming once again, as particularly my colleague from New York, Assemblywoman Williams. We're from different parties, but common sense is common sense. And this is an issue of public safety for the people of Brooklyn, of Queens, of Staten Island, Bronx and Manhattan. And we, as you know, Mr. Chairman, know that we have roughly 200,000 migrants in New York City. We don't know the exact number because the city shields this information from us. But what we do know is just last week, a Venezuelan migrant who is a known gang member shot 2 NYPD officers. In fact, it happened in the district of somebody in this committee. This person crossed into this country illegally from Texas in July, and his asylum case was dismissed by a Chicago court, and he's been living at a migrant shelter in New York City in Queens. It's completely outrageous that we have a policy in place by this administration allowing people who are gang members, drug traffickers, criminals to enter into our country. And then on top of it, you're asking the residents of New York, the hardworking taxpayers, to pay for them to be housed in their communities, living free. They're living in these shelters. Some of them are luxury hotels that have turned into shelters. Some are national parks that have been turned into shelter, as is the issue that we're discussing today, Floyd Bennett Field. I want to highlight some of the concerns from the media, from individuals that have spoken to the media about spikes in robberies, that there have been arrests, crimes, concerns. We know that there's been panhandling, shoplifting. As a matter of fact, I pulled up some of the stats for the precinct in which Floyd Bennett Field is, and robbery is up over last year 35%. Car thefts are up 51%. Larceny up 29, nearly 30%. Retail theft, which is a concern that the Assemblywoman expressed to me, up 60%. And then you have assaults that are up roughly 50%, hate crimes up 500%. It's just, and I've had a hard time, my first question is to the Assemblywoman, because I've had a hard time getting the actual statistics of people who are committing crimes that reside in the shelters. We know there were there were thousands of arrests. We know that much because when some of the media finally got to the numbers. Do you have any of that information, or is the city stonewalling you as well? Because I put in a FOIL request to get this data when I found out that there were thousands of arrests already made of migrants living in our city. And then when we saw the police officers being assaulted in Times Square, shot in Queens, multiple stabbings that have resulted in death, all right? That's what's happening in the media. Do you have the stats? Has NYPD, because the city won't allow them to cooperate with ICE to deport criminals, has the mayor's office allowed the NYPD to give your office that information?
Well, back in January, we did submitted a FOIL request. We did get a response a week ago, and there was no information for them to give to us. But I do know for a fact there was a call on a strangulation that occurred at Floyd Bennett Field. There was some other issues, and those type of crimes are not being made available to the public.
Yeah,
And not even NYPD in some cases can even enter the tents. So you have security guards making decisions on what they deem is a criminal activity, or, in that way, which is just madness.
So we all know that crime is taking place at these shelters because we're reading about it regularly in the newspapers, right? We're just trying to get a hold on those statistics. And I myself have also been stonewalled, unfortunately, by the city. I put in my own FOIL request after a letter I sent in October was ignored. January, sent in a FOIL request, said that I was going to get the information in May, and then guess what? In May, they told me now August. So they too are being very disingenuous with the public. Mr. King, you are from that area. Could you talk a little bit about the concerns of some of the residents that you live with? And can you also maybe talk about the taxpayers' concerns about having this national park being taken away from them and the cost that this is coming to the city of New York, where you're seeing services cut for the hardworking citizens?
Well, I think, across, not just Rockaway, but all across Brooklyn and Queens, people are upset because we have a lot of hurting citizens, and now all of a sudden, now we have services getting cut because the money has to come from somewhere. And they're paying an exorbitant amount of money, $28.8 million or $27.8 million to set this up. But we definitely see the negative effects in our community as well. So, with summer coming, we'll have more of the problems. We said in the beginning we were afraid this would be a humanitarian crisis in the park that'll spill into the neighborhoods. Now that summer's coming, that's going to be spilling more aggressively into Rockaway. And we don't have, it's an area where we have very little police protection, we have very little services of any sort, stores. So it's a recipe for bad things to happen.
Okay. My time has expired. I don't know if we're going to be able to do another round, but I did have more questions.
Well, we
Mr.
can
Chairman.
always submit those for the record. I'm going to recognize myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Morrissey, just yesterday we heard alarming reports that 8 suspected migrant terrorists with possible ties to ISIS were arrested as part of a sting operation in Los Angeles, Philadelphia, and more notably, your New York City. According to the sources in the reporting, quote, All 8 men crossed through the southern border into the U.S., and their criminal background checks came back clean when they crossed. One even used the CBP One app, which the Biden administration created to allow migrants to book appointments to claim asylum and enter our country. According to sources, quote, part of the investigation featured a wiretap which revealed one of the now arrested individuals talking about bombs. One of that sources stated, quote, remember the Boston Marathon? I'm afraid something like that might happen again or worse, end quote. To your understanding, is there a screening process or background check in place for the Fort Bennett Field migrant camp to ensure that certain migrants are not threats to the surrounding communities?
No, sir. There
None
is
whatsoever.
nothing. Nothing that I know of, no.
So, Ms. Williams, I know that when I was up there, it was going to be a man camp. Now I understand it's families, right?
Correct.
So, in some ways, I would say that's a little better because you had all these children, all these youth activities out there, hockey, baseball, all those things, right? I've had man camps. I'm from Wyoming, and they had oil and gas man camps, and those are not really all that fun, but I think women and children might be a little better. However, tarmac gets hot and radiates heat, doesn't it not?
It does, very much so, especially Floyd Bennett Field.
Wow. It doesn't take very much of a resource to know that a child can get dehydrated instantaneously almost from heat, right?
Especially walking from that tent to get the bus service off of Flatbush can be excruciating.
Ms. Morrissey, given the arrest, does your concern of this proximity to the migrant camp really support the police? Or should we be more worried about what's happening for the police in the proximity of this camp?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, so does it concern you the proximity of this camp to so many in your communities and to your police department's response time?
Yes, it does concern me, because if you read in the newspapers and see that our police forces are at low manpower already, and having all these additional forces, all the migrants coming in, it's going to be a huge strain on our first responders. And also, in regards, being a retired NYPD lieutenant, I also feel that, you know, from working actually at that base, aviation, there is also a police site there. It's an emergency service site that our police officers come out. And I also, besides the concern of the crime and the heat from actually doing RMP training there, that tarmac gets very, very hot. So I know that for a fact. It is very hot on that. And as for crime, we're maxed out. There's not enough officers citywide, never mind in the smaller commands. So it is a great concern.
Well, even the police may have some advantages or disadvantages, but it's a legal system that puts them back out on the floor, on the field, to create a bigger problem for you. Well, I know something about heat. In fact, my friend Andy Biggs and I were on a tarmac in Phoenix, and I know Phoenix gets a little hotter than New York, but probably not much. All of a sudden we heard this ping, 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 ping. What it was his shoes were falling apart. They were shooting off the plastic. They got so hot they just shut off. That's pretty impressive when you're talking about heat, very heat. Ms. Williams, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, can I just add, these are such valid points, and Floyd Bennett Field is 4 miles away from Kings Plaza Mall that is open to the public. And, you know, we've seen in the last few months, especially during the holiday time, so many families in there panhandling, making it a very uncomfortable situation, playing at the heartstrings of families and so forth. And as a parent myself, it was very difficult to see that. But as the weather gets warmer as well, we can't even imagine how such a public place will be, filled with so many individuals, seeking, probably a warmer place to relax.
Well, the last question I'm having, and what we're going to do is go to the gentleman from New York, and then the ranking member and I are going to ask you one more last question instead of going a second round. I'll just wait. How about that? We'll just go to Mr. Esposito for 5 minutes from New York.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the committee for allowing me to wave on. Ms. Fisher, I would like to direct my first line of questioning to you. In your summary of your opening statement, in the second paragraph, it says, Amnesty International is a Nobel Prize-winning global human rights organization committed to fighting for the human rights of all people, no matter where they are or where they're from. The third paragraph says, our vision is of a world in which every person enjoys all of the human rights enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other international human rights instruments. Sounds very promising. My question to you is, do you think that what's happening right now in the United States of America under the failed policies of Joe Biden and Secretary Mayorkas, do you believe that it is the responsibility of Americans, do you believe that it's the responsibility of New Yorkers to foot the bill of individuals coming into this country illegally?
Thank you so much for that question. I think what we have seen is actually decades of failed policies that have invested billions of dollars.
With all due respect, I only have 5 minutes, and we're not going to talk about the years and decades of failed immigration policy. What we're going to talk about today is the failed policies, the border security failed policies of Joe Biden. So my question is very simple. It's a yes or no question. Do you believe that the American people, do you believe that New Yorkers should foot the bill for people coming into this country illegally?
Seeking asylum is a right under U.S. law. So I think the question is a little bit flawed, but what I'm suggesting is that
coming into this country and seeking asylum is when you do it the correct and legal way. When
the
people
U.S.
when people cross our
allows
borders,
for people to seek
when people
asylum
cross our
regardless
borders-
of their manner of
I'll
entry.
reclaim my time. When people cross borders and they come here illegally, and more importantly, specific to what we're talking about today, when they come here and commit crimes, they commit crimes, they are released because, well, that's not the failed policies of Joe Biden, it's the failed policies of Governor Hochul in New York State. They commit crimes and they are released to commit more crimes. What we're talking about today is Floyd Bennett Field. Have you ever visited Floyd Bennett Field?
No, sir, I have not.
Okay, well, I will tell you that in your opening statement that you submitted, your vision is of a world in which every person enjoys all the human rights enshrined in the Universal Declaration. I will tell you that having worked as an NYPD detective for over 16 years and visited Floyd Bennett Field many times, as someone who has spent his entire life living in New York City and traveled in and out of JFK Airport routinely, I will tell you two things. First, Floyd Bennett Field and JFK Airport, neither one of them is a world in which you enjoy human rights. People living in an empty warehouse at JFK Airport, that's not the human rights that they risk their life to come here for.
I wholeheartedly agree with
Living at Floyd Bennett Field, which is in the close proximity to not only military operations, but special operations of the New York City Police Department, not only is that not where they should be living, but it's also not safe.
I agree with that, sir.
And that's what is just mind-boggling, is that we continue to allow people into this country illegally, and then we, the United States of America, and the people who pay taxes have to foot the bill for them to come here to not only live and eat and have cell phones. And I mean, we've heard stories of people coming across the southern border. The moment that they cross over and they do like their touch base with asylum, they are on their phone getting an Uber to wherever that they want to go. Literally, there's been Ubers that sit on the southern border waiting to take people places. My next line of questioning, I only have a minute left, is to Ms. Morrissey. First of all, thank you for your service to the NYPD. We're both retired. Obviously, we know what it takes to keep people safe and protect our communities. These are disastrous policies, and as the summer approaches where we see crime skyrocket, right, because that's what happens. When it gets nicer out, there's more crimes that are committed. Do you believe that the migrants committing crimes now surrounding Floyd Bennett Field will contribute to the summer crime season?
Absolutely, because the heat and living in close proximity to each other in a very hot tent is going to cause violence with themselves and their surrounding neighborhoods, including everyone.
And I would assume you're here, so probably you and Mr. King and Ms. Williams and others have expressed these concerns, correct?
Yes.
I really do hope they're heard, because the American people are paying the price for the Biden border crisis, and it's a shame. With that, my time's expired. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I think the gentleman from New York, the gentlewoman from New Mexico is recognized for her 5 minutes. We're going to ask one round. She's going to ask one question.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. These House Natural Resources Committee hearings are always an interesting fever dream. I want to welcome my colleagues from New York to the House Natural Resources Committee. This is not a city council meeting for New York City. This is not a state assembly hearing in the New York State Assembly. And this is also not a committee that has jurisdiction over immigration or international affairs. We're here because we have stewardship over our lands, waters, and wildlife. And there's been a lot of strange misinformation provided here today, but one thing that I do think is helpful for the public to know is that part of the role and responsibility of members of Congress is to serve their communities, to do casework. And we had 3 members of New York's delegation here today. Please follow up with your members of Congress. They can help facilitate conversations with our federal agencies. That's our job. That's actually why we're here. So we don't need to have fake hearings that are about political issues. It's really about just facilitating those kind of conversations. I do want to correct the record on a few things, and then I'll turn it over for a quick question. First of all, there was a comment made about veterans. We've had the largest expansion of veterans benefits ever in American history in the last Congress, with the passing of the PACT Act and the eligibility of 3 million more veterans to qualify for that. There's been a lot of misinformation about how immigration and asylum works. Most of the people who are currently being housed in various places by the places where they're being received have already been screened at the border. In fact, that is our policy. And they have been screened to be safe. Of course, there's always violence that occurs in our communities, but they also are awaiting asylum hearings in the asylum system. And if our friends across the aisle would like to fix the immigration system, fund our programs and pass bipartisan immigration reform and work on these issues. Don't hold political hearings, but actually get to work on the issues that the American people care about and that are impacting so clearly our communities. But Assemblywoman, I really appreciated some of the comments you made earlier about humane solutions and about collaboration. And I understand very much like the challenge of working with the federal bureaucracy. All of our communities struggle with it, and certainly we're committed to helping support work out issues so that there is better coordination. But we don't have jurisdiction over the state or the city here, but because we are here talking about immigration, about what to do with the populations who are here in our communities, I want to start with Ms. Fisher, and then I'd love to ask Ms. Williams as well. You know, what do you see as being some of the ways in which we can fix the existing systems to help get people through the asylum system faster, to more humanely house people, to make sure that families are safe in the spaces where they are living in the interim, and to make sure that our communities have a say in the process? So I'll start with Ms. Fisher and then turn to Ms. Williams.
Thank you so much for that question. And I think the answer actually here starts with federal coordination. It's really not feasible for just 1 or 2 cities to, like New York and Chicago, to receive such high numbers of new arrivals. With federal coordination, we can ensure that new arrivals that do not already have ties to the United States have the opportunity to go places that are facing labor shortages, population decline, and can benefit from a boost of new workers. People also need the ability to work. Asylum seekers are only able to receive work permits once their asylum applications have been pending for 6 months. That needs to be sped up. If we take the example of Carla, who I spoke about in my opening statement, it took her months of doing, the hair and nails of people in her shelter to save up the thousands of dollars she needed to pay for an immigration attorney to then file for asylum and then start the clock to wait the 6 months for her work permit, which obviously delayed their ability to move out of shelters and into independence. And again, what we need is a system that provides people the ability to come here safely in a dignified manner and support services to help them navigate their cases in immigration court. These solutions have not only proven to be more effective at helping people comply with their immigration requirements, they also will save taxpayers' dollars and bolster local economies.
Go ahead, sure.
Ms. Williams, again, the question, excuse me, Assembly Williams, excuse me. Again, the question is really for individuals that are already here and that do need housing, how can there be better collaboration and support for the communities that are hosting these folks and helping to make sure that there are safe and humane environments for folks to, start their next chapter?
Thank you. There definitely has to be a dialogue with all the electeds at the table. That's a start in the right direction for a better solution, number one, which that opportunity was not given to us 9 months ago. So moving forward, and the best thing we can do for those families that Floyd Bennett feel is not to renew the lease and, try to do something better, whether it's open up the rest of the state, have them vetted much quicker, because we know for sure that not everyone who is seeking asylum is going to be granted that status. And I just want to piggyback a little bit when we talk about vetting process and it's done at the border. Well, I really wondered what happened with the 8 individuals that was arrested. Didn't they go through that vetting process too? Because for us in South Brooklyn, we do have a shopping mall that thousands and thousands of people visit every day, and God forbid something, crazy had happened, how that could have been a place of an attack or something. So we have to do better, but everyone has to be at the table. It can't be a one-way conversation, and then the local electeds is left in the dark to answer to their constituents. Because most times the local electeds have more interaction with their local constituency. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Assemblywoman, and it's unfortunate that your members of Congress left before they could hear that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're certainly welcome. First of all, I want to address the jurisdictional issue. This is the Oversight Committee of Natural Resources. That means everything is on the table, whether it be national parks, whether it be public lands, whether it be minerals and oil and gas. It all is part of our jurisdiction. So now carefully, I'm going to ask you each, what was the question you were prepared to hear, didn't hear, and what's the answer to that question? We'll start with you, Ms. Williams. What was the question you were prepared to ask or to answer? It wasn't asked, and what was its answer?
So many questions was asked, but one of the things we spoke about, it's the summer months coming up, and that's going to be very, very excruciating with the heat, and how those tents are going to be cooled down. They're going to be run by generators that use diesel, and that's going to be running 24 hours a day for the entire summertime. We're talking about the pollution, air pollution. We're talking about so many different things as you think about the climate aspect, quality of air, and so forth. It is just not good for the families, because we've seen, families, children playing soccer outside of the tents, and those generators going, 24 hours a day, letting out those fumes. How is that impacting the families or the children that is, playing soccer or using their scooter, right outside the premise of the tent?
Thank you. You're next.
Yeah, in addition to being a civic leader, I'm a businessman in Rockaway. Been a partner for 30 years. So question about the economic impact on our businesses and on the workforce. We've spoken a bit about the shoplifting. I mean, there's also situations really throughout Queens where Migrants are taking the stuff they've gotten for free and they're selling it on the street in front of stores, and our retail operations are already struggling. They don't need the competition or have the front of their stores being difficult for customers to get to. So it's been bad for business, but it's been worse for working class and poor New Yorkers. You guys know New York is a very expensive place to live. It's painfully worse with all the inflation we've had the last few years. So if you're working, not even paycheck to paycheck, you're doing odd jobs, putting cash in your pocket, all of a sudden we have an influx of hundreds of thousands of people. A labor glut drives down prices when we need our workers to be able to get better prices. So you have people who are struggling to get by, who either can't make money at all, or they have to fight to accept less money because, a migrant who's living in Floyd Bennett Field doesn't have the overhead that that an American citizen has. And so it's been bad for people on the business side, both the businesses themselves and our working class Americans.
Thank you, Mr. King. Ms. Fisher?
I'll add to that a little bit. I think what I would want to sort of lift up is that, the new arrivals can be a real boon to local economies. There are economists that have estimated that for every 1,000 newly arrived workers, initial state and local tax revenues are expected to increase by 2.5 million. Economists also estimate that a 10% reduction in asylum seekers in a single year would be an $8.9 billion loss to the U.S. economy and an over $1.5 billion in lost tax revenues in 5 years. So I think this idea that, the new arrivals are a drain on the local economy is actually misaligned with what I think mountains of economic evidence is able to show.
Thank you. Ms. Morrissey?
I feel the quality of life, our quality of life, and most important for something that we're overlooking right now is our own children. Kids are passing the migrant children selling in the middle of the summer on a median in the heat with their parents when they're coming from school, explaining mentally for the children of the neighborhood what is going on. While they're going to the beach, they're seeing children standing there. And I feel it's hard for them as parents to explain this to children, the begging, and seeing them when they're going to avoid people in the stores and everything like that being rushed, and the parents' fear and feeling the fear the parents are having. So I feel the mental and the quality of life is extremely crucial. And right now it's affecting everyone, from the elderly being fearful to go in the parking lots, to the parents rushing their children along quickly to avoid any kind of conflict, and some don't even understand what's going on. We're taught different. We're taught to help, but we can't help. It's overrunning the neighborhood, and it's crucial that something be done. It's cruel what's being done, leaving children, families on tar mats in the heat. It's not what the line between right and wrong is very gray right now, and it's very hard to explain.
Ms. Morrissey, I love your comment at the very end there. There isn't a broken system. We're not enforcing the law. If there's things that have to be changed, once the law is enforced, then you can change them. But you can't just change the goalposts. So from that standpoint, I want to thank all of our witnesses for coming so far and for your expert testimony. There'll be maybe more questions. We'll have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we'll ask you to respond to those in writing. Under Committee Rule 3, members of the committee must submit questions to the subcommittee clerk by 5 p.m. on Tuesday, June 18th. The hearing record will be open up for 10 days for your responses. If there's no further business,